The housewarming gift, the move, was supposed to mark a fresh beginning. After years of living in cramped apartments, with paper-thin walls that leaked every argument and every late-night laugh of strangers, the new house felt like freedom. Michael and Clara had saved for years, pinching every penny, skipping vacations, and driving cars long past their expiration date. Now, with their daughter Emily just shy of 6, they finally had a place of their own. A 2-story brick house in a quiet cul-de-sac, with a fenced backyard and just enough distance from the nearest neighbor to finally breathe. The first evening was a blur of cardboard boxes, takeout pizza, and Emily's delighted giggles as she ran from room to room, announcing which corner would become her castle. Clara smiled through her exhaustion, watching her daughter collapse into her new pink bedspread and fall asleep without protest. Michael kissed Clara's temple, whispered, "We did it," and for the first time in years, they went to bed in a place that felt like it might finally be permanent. It was in the morning that they first noticed the box. Michael found it on the porch, tucked just beside the welcome mat, as though someone had set it down carefully rather than dropped it. The cardboard was old, softened at the edges, with brown tape curling at the seams. No name, no address, just the words, "Welcome home." He picked it up, frowned, and carried it into the kitchen. "Did you see this last night?" he asked Clara, setting it on the counter. Clara shook her head, tying back her hair. "Maybe the neighbors? Like a housewarming thing." Michael glanced through the window at the still sleepy street. No curtains twitched, no one waved. Just silence. Emily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "What's that?" "Just a gift," Clara said quickly, her tone careful. She didn't like the box either, Michael could tell. They hesitated before opening it, but Emily's excitement pushed them forward. Clara sliced the tape with a butter knife. Inside, wrapped in crinkled tissue paper, lay an object neither of them could identify at first. A tall glass jar filled with cloudy liquid, and inside it, something dark. At first Michael thought it was a branch, maybe driftwood. But as Clara tilted the jar, a pale shape floated into view. Fingers. Emily squealed, delighted. "It's a doll hand." But it wasn't. Michael's stomach dropped. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't wood. It was shriveled gray, with nails that curved like claws. Clara slammed the lid shut, shoving the box away. Who the hell would send that? Michael forced a laugh for Emily's sake. Some stupid prank. Probably kids. But his voice was too tight. They threw the jar back in the box, taped it up, and set it in the garage. Out of sight, out of mind. Or so they thought. That night, Emily woke screaming. Clara rushed into her room to find her daughter sitting upright, pointing at the corner. "There's someone here," Emily whispered. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. "A man. He was watching me." Clara checked the closet, under the bed, every shadowed corner. Nothing. She stroked Emily's hair until she drifted back to sleep. But when she returned to bed, Michael was awake, staring at the ceiling. "She said a man?" he asked. "Yes, probably just a dream." But Michael wasn't so sure. The next morning, the box was back on the porch. Michael froze when he saw it. He had locked the garage. He knew he had. Yet there it was. Same cardboard, same curling tape, same sharp letters. "Welcome home." Inside, this time, was a photograph. A black and white Polaroid, grainy, blurred at the edges. But the figures were clear enough. Michael, Clara, and Emily, standing in their new kitchen. Michael's blood ran cold. It was the photo he'd asked Clara to take on their first night in the house. But they hadn't printed it. "How the hell?" Clara whispered, covering her mouth. Michael tore the photo in half and threw it in the trash. He shoved the box into the bin outside, slamming the lid shut. But when he came back inside, Emily was staring at him. "Daddy," she said softly, "why are you mad at the man?" The days grew stranger. Small things at first. Footsteps in the hall when everyone was in bed. Lights flickering even after bulbs were replaced. The faint smell of something rotten that drifted in and out of rooms. Clara began sleeping with the lamp on. Michael took to double-checking locks 3 times each night. Emily grew quieter. She no longer played in her room. Instead, she sat at the foot of the stairs, whispering to someone unseen. When Clara asked her what she was doing, Emily smiled dreamily. Talking to the man in the jar. Clara's stomach turned. She hadn't told Emily what was inside. They hadn't let her look closely. Michael brought the jar out that night, slamming it onto the counter. The shriveled hand floated in its murky bath, fingers bent in a grotesque curl. "This is garbage," he snapped. "Tomorrow, I'm taking it to the dump." But Clara caught his wrist. "Michael, what if? What if what?" Her eyes flicked to Emily's closed bedroom door. "What if throwing it away makes things worse?" Michael wanted to argue, but deep down he felt it too. That same gnawing dread, as though whatever force had delivered the gift wasn't finished with them. That night he dreamed of the jar, of the hand pressing against the glass, nails scraping, trying to claw its way free. On the 3rd morning, Michael found the box again, waiting. The words seemed sharper now, gouged into the cardboard. "Welcome home." Inside, another Polaroid. This time it showed Emily, alone in her room, asleep. Michael's knees buckled. He had to grip the counter to steady himself. Someone was in their house. Clara wanted to call the police, but what could they say? That an old box kept appearing? That their daughter spoke to someone no one else could see? Instead, Michael did something reckless. He set up cameras, every hallway, every entrance, even Emily's room. He wanted proof. He needed to know. For 2 nights, nothing. The cameras showed empty rooms, sleeping family, the house silent and still. On the 3rd night, the footage froze at 3:07 a.m. Every camera. Black screen, then static. When the video resumed, the jar was in the center of the living room floor. Its lid unscrewed. The hand inside was gone. Emily woke screaming again. The house changed after that. Whispers seeped from the walls, low and guttural, too distorted to understand. Emily grew pale, withdrawn, her once bouncy curls hanging limp. She stopped answering when Clara called her name, but sometimes, Michael caught her lips moving soundlessly, as though replying to something only she could hear. One evening, Clara found her drawing at the kitchen table. Crayon figures scrawled across the page. Mommy, Daddy, Emily, and a 4th figure, tall, black, with too many fingers. "Who's that, sweetheart?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Emily looked up, eyes blank. "That's the man. He says he lived here first." Michael wanted to move, to leave everything behind, but Clara reminded him of their finances. They had sunk everything into this house. They couldn't just walk away. But the house didn't care about their money. The house had already claimed them. The final night began with silence. No whispers, no flickering lights, just a stillness that felt heavier than noise. Michael woke at 3:07 a.m. to the sound of the front door creaking open. He grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and rushed downstairs. The jar sat in the middle of the living room again, empty. A Polaroid lay beside it. His hands shook as he picked it up. The photo showed him, standing in the living room, holding the Polaroid. Michael dropped it, heart pounding. He spun, searching the shadows. That was when he heard Emily's voice. "Daddy!" She stood at the top of the stairs, pale and small in her nightgown. But her eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too hollow. Behind her, a shape unfolded. Tall. Black. Fingers stretching unnaturally long. Clara screamed from upstairs. Michael charged forward, swinging the bat, but it never connected. The air itself seemed to twist, thickening, pressing against him like invisible hands. His vision blurred. His breath caught in his throat. The last thing he saw was Emily's smile. Sweet, innocent, and utterly wrong. "Don't worry, Daddy," she whispered. "The man says we're his family now." And the jar, shattered on the floor, gleamed with wet shards as something unseen finally stepped free. Story 2. The locked room. When Emma and James moved into the Victorian house on Alder Lane, they thought they had found the perfect place to start over. The house had high ceilings, polished wooden floors, and a wraparound porch that made Emma feel like she was stepping into an old photograph. It was larger than anything they thought they could afford, and the realtor had smiled just a little too quickly when James asked why it had been sitting empty for nearly 2 years. She brushed it off with talk about the market and timing, and they didn't press further. There was one odd detail, though. Upstairs, at the very end of the hallway, there was a door. Heavy, painted the same white as the trim, but with an old-fashioned brass handle dulled by years of touch. It was locked. The realtor had waved her hand almost dismissively when Emma asked about it. "Oh, that room? Just storage. The previous owners never cleared it out, and the family didn't leave a key. Best to just leave it alone until you decide if you want to call a locksmith." Emma had frowned at that. Who sells a house without access to one of its rooms? But James had been enchanted by the bay windows in the living room and the massive fireplace, so the question drifted away like a stray leaf. They signed the papers, and by the following month they were moved in. For the first few weeks, life in the house was charmed. Friends came over for wine and laughter, marveling at the creaky charm of the place. Emma hung curtains, James filled bookshelves, and the empty rooms began to feel alive again. The locked door became a background curiosity, like a puzzle they would solve someday. Emma even joked about it, telling guests it was where the ghosts are stored, but the joke started to lose its humor. It began with noises. At first, they were faint, like the shift of old wood in the night, the settling of beams and plaster. Then came the scraping, long, dragging sounds that seemed to come from behind the locked door. Emma would freeze in the hallway at night, holding a basket of laundry, certain she had heard something move in there. James always brushed it off. Old houses groan. That's what makes them charming. But Emma noticed how he never lingered near the door. One evening, while James was working late, Emma walked past the locked room and heard something different. Not scraping this time. Whispering. Low, urgent, like a conversation carried on just out of reach. She pressed her ear to the cool wood, straining to hear. For a moment, she was certain someone was standing on the other side, murmuring. When she jerked back, her heart hammering, the whispers stopped. By the time James got home, Emma had convinced herself it was her imagination. Still, she began avoiding that hallway at night. Then the dreams started. Emma would wake in the small hours of the morning, drenched in sweat, her dreams thick with images of the locked door. Sometimes she dreamed it was opening slowly, revealing a dark space that pulled her in like a tide. Other times, she dreamed she was inside the room already, though she could never see its walls. Only the feeling of being watched, of something waiting in the shadows, patient and hungry. James began dreaming too. One morning, over coffee, he mentioned casually, "I had the strangest dream. That room at the end of the hall, it was open, and there was someone standing inside. A little girl, I think." Emma dropped her spoon, the clatter startling them both. She hadn't told him about her own dreams. They stopped talking about it, but the tension grew. One Saturday afternoon, while James was outside working on the fence, Emma stood at the locked door, staring at it. She pressed her palm against the wood, testing, and thought she felt the faintest vibration beneath her skin, as though something inside had stirred at her touch. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Who's in there?" For a heartbeat, silence. Then came a knock. From the inside. Emma stumbled back, slamming against the opposite wall, her throat tightening with a scream that wouldn't come. The knocking didn't repeat, but she refused to go upstairs again until James returned. When she finally told him, his face went pale. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. That night, James brought up calling a locksmith. Emma agreed instantly. The locksmith arrived on Tuesday. He was a stocky man with a kind smile, carrying a jangling ring of tools. "Old door, old lock," he said as he crouched down. "Shouldn't take me long." Emma and James stood together at the end of the hall, holding hands, watching as the man worked. For a while, the house was silent except for the tinkering of metal. Then, with a soft click, the lock yielded. "There we go," the locksmith said, straightening. He twisted the handle and pushed. The door didn't budge. He frowned, leaned his shoulder against it, shoved harder. Still nothing. "Strange," he muttered. "It's unlocked, but it feels stuck." James stepped forward, tried pulling, then pushing. The door didn't move an inch, as though something on the other side was bracing against it. The locksmith wiped his brow, muttering about warped frames. "Sometimes these old houses shift. You'll need to pry it open properly." He packed his tools, leaving them with advice about crowbars and wood rot. When he was gone, Emma stared at the door. The brass handle gleamed dully, as if mocking her. That night, she woke to the sound of the door creaking open. She bolted upright in bed, her chest tight, and turned toward the hall. From where she sat, she could see the faint outline of the door at the end of the corridor. It was ajar. Her breath caught. She shook James awake, but by the time he blinked into the darkness, the door was closed again. They didn't speak of it in the morning. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed. Emma caught movement out of the corner of her eye, fleeting shapes that vanished when she turned. James grew short-tempered, snapping at her for no reason, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. At night, they both heard soft footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway when they knew they were alone. Then, one evening, James went upstairs and didn't come back down. Emma found him standing before the locked room, his hand resting on the knob, his eyes glassy. "James?" she whispered. He didn't respond. His lips moved soundlessly, as though repeating words she couldn't hear. When she touched his arm, he startled violently, shoving her away. "I almost had it," he hissed, his voice low and furious. "You ruined it." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. She had never seen him look at her with such venom. That night, she dreamed of the little girl James had mentioned. The child stood just inside the locked room, pale and thin, her hair hanging in damp strands over her face. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Don't let him in." Emma woke with her pulse thundering. She knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in her bones, that something was trying to open that door, and it wasn't James. It was using him. The following evening, while James was in the shower, Emma went to the door. She pressed her ear against it. The whispering returned, louder now, a chorus of voices threading together, coaxing, pleading. Her heart pounded. "Not me," she whispered. "You can't have me." A sudden, violent bang rattled the door. Emma screamed, stumbling back. The voices fell silent. She packed a bag that night. When James came downstairs, she told him she was leaving. "You can't," he said flatly. His face was pale, his eyes dark. "It won't let us." Emma fled anyway. She drove to her sister's house, heart racing, hands shaking. But she couldn't stay away. 2 days later, when she returned to collect the rest of her belongings, the house was eerily quiet. James was nowhere to be found. His car was in the driveway, his phone on the counter, but he didn't answer her calls. Her eyes lifted unwillingly to the upstairs hallway. The door at the end was standing wide open. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Beyond the threshold was nothing but darkness, thick, impenetrable, almost alive. She thought she saw a shape move inside. A hand. A face. And then a whisper, "Welcome home." The door slammed shut. Emma dropped her bag and ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. She never went back. But sometimes late at night, her phone rings. No caller ID. When she answers, all she hears is the sound of a door creaking slowly open. Story 3. Echoes in the walls. When Hannah moved into her new apartment, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. After years of cramped dorm rooms and shared houses, this one bedroom on the edge of the city was hers alone. The building wasn't new. It had the kind of age where the wooden floors groaned under every step and the pipes rattled faintly when water ran. But it was affordable and, most importantly, quiet. Or so she thought. The first few nights, she settled into her routines. She unpacked boxes, hung curtains, and lined her books along the single shelf nailed into the living room wall. At night, she liked to leave a small lamp glowing in the corner, casting a soft yellow warmth that made the otherwise shadow-filled apartment feel less empty. She slept deeply, too exhausted from moving to notice much of anything. But on the fourth night, just as she was drifting between waking and dreaming, Hannah stirred. A faint sound broke the silence, so faint that at first she thought it was the radiator or perhaps the upstairs tenant walking across the floor. But when she listened closely, heart pounding, she realized it wasn't the creak of wood or the clang of pipes. It was a voice, muffled, indistinct, as though buried beneath the plaster. A soft whisper threading through the very walls. Hannah sat upright in bed, straining her ears. The whisper faded, leaving only the low hum of the refrigerator in the other room. She exhaled slowly, convincing herself she had been dreaming, or perhaps the neighbors next door were having a late-night conversation. Thin walls, she reasoned. Old buildings carried sound in strange ways. The next day, she dismissed it. But that night, the whisper returned. This time, she heard it more clearly. A low murmur, syllables half-formed, seeping from the wall by her headboard. It wasn't a conversation. It was too disjointed, too deliberate. Pauses, as if the speaker was waiting for her reaction. Her skin prickled. She pressed her ear against the cool wall, her heart hammering, and froze. The voice was not coming from the next apartment. It was inside the wall. "Hello?" it breathed, as if testing the sound of the word. Hannah leapt back, stumbling from her bed. She turned on the lamp, filling the room with its golden light. The whispering stopped instantly, cut off as though it had never been. The wall loomed blank and unremarkable. Pale paint cracked at the edges, a faint water stain near the ceiling. She hardly slept that night, leaving music playing on her phone to drown out the silence. But even through the melody, she thought she heard faint murmurs rising now and again, like a trickle of water through unseen pipes. By the end of the week, Hannah was sleep-deprived and irritable. During the day, she told herself it was a trick of the old building. Houses made noises, settling wood, rushing air, rodents scratching. But at night, when she lay still in bed, the truth pressed against her. The voices weren't random. They were speaking to her. Sometimes it was a woman's voice, low and hushed. Sometimes a man's, deeper, distorted by the wall. They never said much, only fragments. Her name, whispered like a secret. Or she knocked on the wall, demanded whoever was there to stop. No response. She moved her bed to the opposite side of the room. The voices followed, drifting from another patch of plaster. One night, she even slept in the living room, only to be woken at 3 a.m. by a faint chuckle seeping from the wall behind the couch. Her friends laughed when she told them. "Old pipes," one said. "You're just lonely," another teased. Hannah wanted to believe them, but she knew loneliness couldn't explain the way the whispers always grew louder when she listened, as though aware of her attention. Soon, paranoia gripped her waking hours. She kept the TV on at all times, clattering noise into the apartment. She avoided sitting still. But the voices didn't stop. They began to invade daylight too, soft murmurs as she made coffee, faint laughter when she showered. Once, while brushing her teeth, She heard her own name, clear, unmistakable, spoken directly into her ear. Terrified, she contacted the landlord, demanding an inspection. He sent a maintenance man who tapped along the walls, shining a flashlight into vents. "Place is old but solid," he said with a shrug. "Might be rodents, might just be sound traveling weird. Nothing to worry about." But Hannah couldn't let it go. That night, armed with a hammer, she pressed her ear against the living room wall where the whispering seemed strongest. It was quiet at first. Then, slowly, a voice emerged. "Don't do that." Her blood turned to ice. She dropped the hammer, backing away. Her breath came in ragged bursts, panic clawing at her chest. The voice had answered her action directly. It wasn't random. It wasn't memory. It wasn't madness. Someone or something was in the walls. She didn't sleep at all. Instead, she sat in the corner with every light on, staring at the walls until dawn. Shadows seemed to ripple faintly across the plaster, like something shifting just beneath the surface. By morning, Hannah was determined. If no one believed her, she would find proof herself. She bought a cheap endoscope camera that could snake into small holes. That evening, she drilled into the wall near the living room corner, heart hammering with each turn of the bit. Dust spilled onto the floor. She inserted the camera, the small screen flickering as it illuminated the darkness behind the plaster. At first, all she saw was insulation and wooden beams. She adjusted the angle, pushing deeper into the cavity. Then something pale flashed across the lens. She froze, adjusting again. A face, pressed against the far side of the wall, so close the camera nearly brushed it. The features were indistinct, blurred as though half-formed, but unmistakably human. Hollow eye sockets stared back into the lens, unblinking. The mouth opened slowly. Static burst across the screen and the feed cut out. Hannah ripped the device from the wall, dropping it to the floor. Her stomach lurched with horror. That night, the whispers turned into full sentences. They called her name again and again, overlapping voices, dozens of them now, rising and falling like a chorus. They laughed. They wept. They begged. "We're waiting. Join us. You've seen us now." She pressed her hands over her ears, rocking on the floor, but the voices pressed through, louder than her own thoughts. In desperation, Hannah fled the apartment. She stayed with a friend across town for 2 nights, finally sleeping soundly. For a while, she convinced herself it had been exhaustion, paranoia, maybe even a hallucination born of stress. But on the 3rd night, as she lay in her friend's guest bed, her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Hands trembling, she pressed play. The recording was faint, muffled by static. But beneath the distortion, the voices were clear, whispering from within the walls of her friend's apartment now. "We found you." Hannah dropped the phone, her body cold with terror. The voices hadn't been bound to the old apartment at all. They were following her. They had always been inside the walls, every wall, everywhere she went. And no matter how far she ran, there would always be walls. The final tenant, when James found the listing, it seemed too good to be true. A 2-story house on the outskirts of town, half the price of any other property he had looked at, and available immediately. The photos online showed wide windows, polished wooden floors, and a quaint charm that reminded him of childhood summers at his grandmother's cottage. It looked lived in, but clean, like someone had just stepped out for groceries and left the place waiting for him. The landlord, a weary man named Mr. Palmer, barely spoke during their meeting. He fumbled with the keys, muttered about repairs being overdue, and shoved the lease across the table without much small talk. When James asked why the rent was so cheap, Palmer only shrugged. "Last tenant left in a hurry. Place spooks some folks," he said flatly. "But if you're not the superstitious type, you'll do just fine." James wasn't superstitious. He was practical, a man in his late 30s trying to start over after a divorce. Money was tight and he needed a place fast. He signed the lease that same afternoon. The first night was uneventful, though the house creaked more than he expected. Old wood expanding, contracting, that was all. He unpacked slowly, his boxes stacked neatly in the living room. As he dozed off on the couch with takeout cartons on the coffee table, he thought the silence of the neighborhood was comforting. But in the middle of the night, he woke to the sound of footsteps above him. Heavy, deliberate. He froze, heart hammering, staring up at the ceiling. The landlord had said he was the only occupant. James grabbed a flashlight and crept upstairs, but every room was empty. The air felt oddly cold, the kind of chill that seeps into bone. He laughed it off the next morning. "Old house sounds," he muttered. He almost convinced himself. Days passed, and the noises continued. Doors clicked shut by themselves. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. More than once, James swore he saw someone standing at the end of the hall, but when he blinked, the figure was gone. The strangest part was the attic. From the moment he moved in, he felt drawn to it. The narrow staircase leading up was tucked behind a door in the hallway, and though he told himself he had no reason to go there, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting inside. The doorknob was ice cold every time he touched it, and on 2 separate nights, he swore he heard faint breathing behind the door. When he finally mustered the courage to look, he climbed the narrow steps with a flashlight. The attic was mostly empty, just dust, cobwebs, and a few broken pieces of furniture. But in the far corner, against the wall, sat a rocking chair. It faced the center of the room as though someone had been sitting there, waiting. He swept the light across it, and though it didn't move, his stomach tightened with dread. Something about it felt wrong. He backed out without touching a thing. The haunting grew bolder. One evening, as James brushed his teeth, the bathroom mirror fogged over. He hadn't run hot water. Slowly, words appeared in the condensation, drawn by an invisible finger. "Still here," James stumbled backward, dropping his toothbrush. The words lingered, chilling him more than the cold tiles beneath his bare feet. He wiped the mirror, but when the glass cleared, his reflection looked off. His own eyes seemed darker, sunken, and for a split second, he thought another face hovered just behind his shoulder. Sleep became impossible. He lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house, the soft groan of floorboards bending under weight that wasn't his own. Sometimes he heard whispers drifting from the attic, muffled and indecipherable, like a conversation carried through walls. One night, as exhaustion finally dragged him under, James dreamed of the rocking chair. Someone sat in it, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks, dressed in old clothes. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his mouth hung open as though frozen mid-scream. When James jolted awake, the faint sound of creaking drifted down from the attic. The chair was rocking. He confronted Palmer the next day. "Was someone living here before me?" James demanded. Palmer avoided his eyes. "Yeah. Fellow named Howard. Kept to himself mostly. Stayed for years. What happened to him?" Palmer shifted uncomfortably. "Didn't pay rent for a while. I came by to check on him. Found the place locked from the inside. When I finally got the door open," his voice dropped, "Howard was in the attic. Dead. Been there a while. Why didn't you tell me this before I moved in?" James snapped. "You asked about rent." "Not history," Palmer muttered. That night, James bolted the attic door shut. But as he lay in bed, a slow, steady knocking began from above. Not random creaks, knocks. Deliberate. Counting. 3 at a time. Over and over. Sleep-deprived and unraveling, James began talking aloud just to break the silence. "You're not real," he'd whisper. "You're just my imagination." But deep down, he knew better. The haunting escalated. Lights flickered violently. His phone glitched, showing distorted selfies of himself he never took, each one with a shadowed figure looming behind him. One evening, every faucet in the house turned on at once. Water gushed and overflowed, soaking the floors. As he scrambled to shut them off, he caught sight of the mirror again. Howard's face stared back at him. The breaking point came when James woke one night to find the attic door wide open, though he'd nailed it shut earlier that week. At the top of the stairs, silhouetted in the darkness, was a figure. Thin, hunched, head tilted at that same impossible angle. It didn't move. It only watched. Terrified, James shouted, "What do you want?" The figure's voice rasped, a whisper echoing through the house. "I never left." From that night forward, James was no longer alone. Every moment carried the weight of Howard's presence. Shadows trailing him, whispers curling into his ears, the rocking chair creaking endlessly above. Neighbors began avoiding the house. They noticed James muttering to himself, curtains drawn, eyes hollow. Delivery drivers refused to approach the porch after hearing strange noises inside. And James realized the horrible truth. Howard hadn't been a tenant. He was the tenant. The final one. The house belonged to him, and it always would. James was just an intruder, tolerated only until Howard decided otherwise. The last entry in James's journal, found weeks later after he disappeared, read only this: "I thought I rented a house. But really, I was the one being rented. And he's not done with me yet." The rocking chair creaked on, upstairs, waiting for its next tenant.